Hey, this is Trey. Thank you for joining us for a special video podcast. As you know, I do not. I eschew video podcasts, but we have a very special guest who was a colleague of mine. He sat on the top row. I was on the bottom row. One of the more thoughtful, introspective, actually one of the best questioners on the Judiciary Committee. And then for some reason, he decided to leave us and become the governor of the great state of Indiana. And he also served as the Vice President of the United States. But it began in Congress, which is when I got to know him. He's a man of unassailable character and integrity. And I thoroughly enjoyed serving with you, and I'm very proud to watch all the things that have happened to you and Miss Karen since then. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Trey. It's been great to watch your career expanding after you left the Capitol Hill onto the airwaves of Fox, and we're just all real proud of you. And I'm glad to hear that Terry spoiled you for Father's Day.
She did. The one person who's actually not my child got me really good gifts, but she just may be the sweetest person in the world. So she takes good care of me. You have always had an interest in foreign policy. You sat in the vice president seat. You were in on all the major decisions. I want to get your take on the Middle East and Israel's decision to strike Iran, although it can certainly be argued that Iran has been striking Israel for decades.
Right. Right. Well, we all begin with that fact. I mean, Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world. For 49 years, the mullahs in Tehran have been sowing violence and terrorism across the region. I truly do believe that Israel had no choice but to launch the airstrikes on a Friday morning, because Iran can never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. That's the policy of Israel. It was the policy of our administration. I'm grateful for President Trump's strong affirmation of support for the action that Israel is taking. It's important to note that the Ayatollah and all of his henchmen in Tehran breathe out not just death to Israel, but death to America. They have been in a headlong rush to obtain a nuclear weapon, and according to public information, I don't take advantage of classified briefings anymore, but according to public information, they've become quite close after 4 years of appeasement and so-called negotiations, where President Biden tried to take us back into that disastrous Iran nuclear deal that he and President Biden forged. But the simple fact is that I think Israel is fighting our fight now, because the aspirations of Iran go far beyond the destruction of Israel. They go to carrying terror into our allies in Europe. They've been developing an intercontinental ballistic missile program that could well in time reach the United States of America. And you pair that with nuclear weapons, which according to the best public information, they've come very close to developing. It's an intolerable situation. I've said many times, if the world knows nothing else, the world should know this: America stands with Israel. And while it was clear, and the administration made it clear, that Israel acted alone early Friday morning, it's important we make it clear that Israel is not alone, and that we are standing just right behind Israel as they act in their self-defense. And as I said over the weekend, I think the United States of America needs to be prepared, even as the president's made it clear, Trey. He's open to negotiations. I heard as we prepared to sit down together that there are press reports that Iran is reaching out to the United States and asking for our country to facilitate a dialogue. And if there was a pathway forward where Iran would surrender its nuclear program, would allow for the verifiable dismantling of any and all aspects of a uranium enrichment and nuclear program, that would be a peaceful way forward. But failing that, I think the United States of America needs to be prepared to give Israel whatever support they need to destroy that nuclear program once and for all. It's in the interest of our most cherished ally, but make no mistake about it, it's in the interest of the United States of America, our security, and that of the free world.
Mr. Vice President, there was a smattering of speculation that the negotiations were just a ruse to allow Israel time to prepare an attack. That, you've been around Donald Trump far more than anyone else, including me. I never got that sense. I got the sense that he was serious about trying to work out a non-military response, but he was also adamant that you're not going to have nuclear capability. You're a man of faith. When one country considers the other country little Satan, how do you negotiate with a group that considers you to be Satan?
Right. And remember, they consider Israel little Satan, and they call America big Satan. And I think you asked the right question. As to the speculation, I feel like our 4.5 years together, where we had a very close working relationship. It didn't end the way I wanted it to, Trey, but I'll always be proud of that record and the relationship that we forged. Sometimes I say that I actually know the president better than his most ardent defenders. And I take him at his word on this. I think the president was extending a 60-day window for Iran to come to the table. I see it as no coincidence that Israel struck on the 61st day. The President of the United States, I think, was trying to send a very clear message to Tehran that there is a way out here. You remember his first foreign trip that he took was Saudi Arabia and to Qatar. I was disappointed that he didn't go to Israel, but it was clear to me throughout that trip that he was extending, if you will, an olive branch to Iran to achieve a peaceful resolution. I will tell you that I had concerns, not about what the president was saying, but some of his representatives early in the administration were speaking about allowing a certain amount of enrichment about a week after Mr. Wickoff said that, and others reiterated it and reflected on it. The president put out on social media, no nuclear in Iran, which I greatly welcome. So I think the better portion here is that the president was trying to give them time before Israel took the very necessary step of moving forward to destroy that nuclear program. But again, you get to the ultimate question, which you talk about me being a questioner back in the days of the Judiciary Committee, folks. I probably don't need to tell any of your faithful podcasts and television viewers that actually the toughest questions came from His Honor here. I do have great doubts. In fact, I got a piece that I think is going to be in Free Press this week about whether this regime in Tehran will ever be a willing partner for peace in the region, that we need to be prepared to support Israel in every way it's necessary to destroy or dismantle the nuclear program, but we also need to be prepared to support the people of Iran if they take to the streets again and demand the restoration of democracy in that country. So we missed those opportunities. Sidebar for a second, we were in Congress together, I believe, during the Obama years when President Obama, the Green Revolution took place. Hundreds of thousands of people poured out on the streets of Iran. President Obama, his administration remained silent, not a word of support for those people that were trying to reclaim their freedom. I had the privilege, along with Congressman Howard Berman, of authoring a resolution that passed nearly unanimously in the House and in the Senate, supporting the Green Revolution, but it all came too late. The mullahs crushed that revolution mercilessly. We can't let that happen again. If if we see the people of Iran reclaiming their freedom, we need to make it clear to the people of Iran that we are with them.
Right now, some distinctions don't make a difference. I think this distinction does make a difference. Right now, the U.S. is saying they will defend Israel. That is different from being part of the military offensive against Iran.
Right.
But there could come a point, people, maybe when I say people, maybe it's just me, staggering how large that country is, Iran. Geographically, it's staggeringly big, the size of Alaska. Israel is tiny. You've been many times, I've been many times. It is tiny. I think the U.S. is reserving the right to help Israel go on the offensive, but right now they're just defending Israel. Is
Right.
that fair?
No, well, that's by all accounts.
Okay.
We've got assets in the region. And during the recent Houthi attacks, it was reported that there were American military assets, including shipboard assets, that were knocking down those missiles, those rockets headed for Israel. I expect our THAAD missile defense system is being employed even as we speak now to defend the people of Israel. But that, as you said, that's all defensive operations, and I have no sense that we're involved in any offensive operations, but I think this is a moment where you never say what you'll never do.
Yes, sir.
And that the objective here is going to be, we are going to see the nuclear program of Iran eliminated. It is either going to be destroyed or it's going to be verifiably dismantled. And I believe that if Israel ultimately needs our help, if it needs American military assets to accomplish that, we should be prepared. We should be prepared to assist them.
Mr. Vice President, I guess people would call you and I hawks. I don't call us hawks. But when I look at the GOP and I see this rising minority that doesn't seem to want to help anyone, they don't want to help Ukraine. I think one prominent or formerly prominent conservative commentator said, let Israel go it alone. There are members of Congress who want Israel to go it alone. These are Republicans.
Right.
I think that power is a gift that should be used to defend the weak. Where did that wing come from? That I guess they would have sat on their hands during World War I and World War II. I guess they wouldn't have been intervened there. Where did that wing come from? Because I don't remember it when you and I served together.
Well, let's go back, because you love history as much as I do. I mean, Americans have never believed it was our role to go across the world and pick fights. George Washington warned against foreign entanglements. There's a good impulse at the base of that. But what we learned through hard experience in the first half of the 20th century is that America's the leader of the free world. And if America's not leading, the free world's not being led. And that there were voices, sadly, in the Republican Party in the 1930s who simply said that the rising dictatorship in Germany, its avaricious ambitions, its breathing hatred and enmity toward the Jewish people was a European problem, and stayed out of it. And I would maintain to you that this is one of the most important debates within the Republican Party today, whether it's Israel's righteous attack that they're leveling to eliminate the nuclear program in Iran, or whether it be continuing to support the people of Ukraine following the brutal and unprovoked invasion by Russia now, nearly 3 years ago. I think the United States of America needs to continue to play that role. I've been very upfront about that. I've been criticized from time to time for it, but I think we've learned hard lessons in history before. There are people that have said that my support for giving military aid to Ukraine is a pathway to World War III. my response is, well, you probably need to study World War II more. It was the lack of American engagement, American leadership early on that allowed World War II to unfold and to the enemies of freedom to be emboldened across the Axis powers. And I believe that weakness arouses evil, and that by standing firm and leading the West, whether it be in Eastern Europe, in the Asia Pacific, or in the Middle East, is a pathway toward a more peaceful world. I will also tell you, this business of being cavalier about sending our troops into harm's way, my son's a major in the United States Marine Corps. My son-in-law is a lieutenant in the United States Navy. Both have deployed to that region before, so I don't take this lightly in the least. I really do believe that peace through strength is not a slogan. It's a policy. And when America is strong, when America stands strong for freedom around the world is a much more peaceful place. As I hasten to add, it was during our 4 years of our administration. We demonstrated that when you use force in the interest of America's allies and to prosecute our interest around the world, whether it be cruise missiles into Syria, whether it be building up our Navy in the Asia Pacific, or whether it be taking out Qasem Soleimani or letting our troops take down ISIS, all of that sent a message of strength to the wider world. And the world during the 4 years of the Trump-Pence administration was a much quieter place, Trey, and I still think that strength is a pathway forward.
Well, I want to thank your family for its willingness to serve our country, both your son and your son-in-law. It is not lost on me. I was doing an interview and people could not find John Ratcliffe, who was the DNI at the time. He was dropping off his daughter at the Naval Academy, which a good father would do. So the notion that the men and women who decide whether to wage war don't have a stake, a familial stake, the most personal stake of all in that decision, is balderdash. You have children serving, other people making these decisions have children serving, but you laid out a geopolitical argument for the U.S. involvement. I think there's also a moral argument that can be made that the strong really do need to take up for the weak. Can't do it everywhere. Can't be the world's policeman. Right. But right. If there's going to be a policeman, it needs to be us. You put your finger on a division. To me, I see a debate, Mr. Vice President, between doctrinaire conservatism, and I consider you. I remember, a young upstart by the name of Paul Ryan taking me aside my first week in Congress and kind of describing you as a doctrinaire conservative, a Reagan conservative. I think there was an election coming up, and I asked him who I should vote for, and he said, well, you should vote for Mike Pence. Like there wasn't any choice. You didn't have a choice who to vote for. There's a populism that's arisen, and sometimes they can coexist, and sometimes there's a clash. Where do you see the future of the GOP? More of that doctrinaire conservatism, or the populism's tough because people change their minds. So if you had to define the modern day Republican Party, how would you do so, and could you?
Well, first, I would say I think you put your finger on really the debate that's in the party today. It's whether we're going to remain true to that traditional conservatism that's defined our party for more than a half a century, and more importantly, has served the interests of the United States of America to create a more free and more prosperous nation than we could ever have imagined. It's principles of limited government, free market economics, the right to life, traditional values, and of course a strong national defense and American leadership in the world. The populist impulse, which is not new, questions America's obligations in the world, actually has a fairly expansive view of government. We actually have some leaders in the Republican Party in Congress today that are advocating growing the size and scope of government, that are advocating price controls, that are advocating a range of things that are inconsistent, I think, with with a belief in limited government. And I've been very troubled. I've always appreciated your deep commitment to the sanctity of life, Trey. I've been troubled after the extraordinary success of our administration appointing conservatives to the highest court in the land that set the stage for overturning Roe v. Wade, giving the American people a new beginning for the cause of life. That there are voices in our party that now would relegate that issue simply to the states, or even beyond that, relegate it to an issue that we just don't want to talk about anymore. And so, for me, it's a question between: are we going to stay true to traditional conservatism of a strong defense, limited government, traditional values, or are we going to follow the siren song of populism, unmoored to conservative principles? And I think there are voices in and around the president who would take us in the direction of populism. The president, I think, has sympathy for aspects of the populist agenda, although I don't consider him to be ideological per se. His favorite description of his own philosophy is common sense, and I accept that. But my one source of hope is, as I've traveled around the country over the last 4 years, even during my brief campaign for the Republican nomination for president back in 23, I'm convinced that whatever the agenda of some in Washington is about the Republican Party, the overwhelming majority of people that ever vote Republican believe in that traditional conservative agenda and always will. And so I have great confidence that if we'll continue to give voice to those principles, we'll continue to raise up a generation of leaders at every level that will articulate those principles. Republican and frankly, independents who share our values will be there to support the cause.
You mentioned the sirens. I'm a big fan of Greek mythology. Odysseus wanted to hear them, but didn't want to pay the price for hearing them. I sometimes tell groups, I don't get invited to speak as often as you do, and probably not for the same price tag, but I do tell groups, I think populism tells people what they want to hear. Conservatism tells people what they ought to hear. And it requires a little more effort. I mean, you never, Jim DeMint was the first one to tell me, you don't get elected telling the voters they're wrong. But you can gain their respect by telling them there's a better way. It's harder and it takes more time. Populism to me is just easy, Mr. Vice President. I mean, you just get a pollster and repeat back to people what they already believe. I mean, I don't know that you can build a movement that lasts on that.
Well, and I'm not sure it's leadership. Trey, you talk a lot about leadership, and you personify great, bold leadership in your life and career. For me, leadership isn't about putting your wet finger in the wind and figuring out where people are going, where the parade's headed, and jumping in front of it. Leadership, particularly on moments and issues that bear upon the security and prosperity and values of the American people, looks more like just being willing to, to plant your feet, let your yes be yes and no be no, and then let people vote. I always had the view, I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. My Christian faith is the most important thing in my life, as it is in yours. I always try and be just completely open with people about who I am, where I stand. And now when it comes down to when I was governor of Indiana, where that particular state road was going to go, hey, let's ask people, particularly people that live in the area there. But I'm talking about, and I think you are too, the foundational issues of freedom and limited government, America's role in the world, and the values of life and family. Those are issues that I really do believe, particularly in this day and age, in the life of the Republican Party, call for leadership and people being willing to step forward. And whatever the future holds for me and my family, like you, I'm gonna continue to be a voice for those traditional conservative values.
As I get older, I'm prone to misremember things, to quote someone else that was famous. But I think I have this right, Mr. Vice President. A very, very high-ranking Democrat once referred to you as a decent man. which in the pantheon of compliments is not the highest compliment I've ever heard. It's just to simply call someone a decent man. But he was excoriated for it, for
He was,
referring
right.
to you as a decent man. What has gotten into our politics? We just had more political violence. You yourself were the victim of political violence. We've had whether Gabby Giffords, whom you and I served together, that happened early on. Stevie Scalise was shot. Esther Salas, a judge in New Jersey, had a disgruntled lawyer execute her son and almost kill her husband. This happened to be a Democrat lawmaker in Minnesota, but there were Republicans on the list too. How did we get to this point in our culture where violence is ever like an option? I mean, rational people don't think that way.
Well, I think first off, Karen and I took time to pray yesterday for Representative Hortman, her husband, their entire family, and their colleagues that were also injured in that assault. And acts of violence, whether it be against people in public life or law enforcement officials, should be universally condemned. And I believe they are. I remember 8 years ago, during our early days in the White House, when I got word that at a practice for the congressional baseball team, that a gunman had opened fire and almost taken the life of our friend Steve Scalise, who was miraculously saved from that assault. Others were injured. It very quickly revealed that the gunman was an MSNBC viewer and a fan of Bernie Sanders. And I remember at the time how there suddenly was debate about all of that talk has to be dismissed immediately. You just said a moment ago. I mean, rational people are not driven to violence by political rhetoric or debate, and we cannot ever allow our freedom of speech to be calibrated or restrained by the evil acts perpetrated by individuals, whether it's a congressional baseball game or whether it be what took place in Minnesota this week. I think it's important that we focus on root causes in this case. First, it's evil in a person's heart that's overtaken them. It's inexplicable to me that the man who I just heard was apprehended in a woods outside his home. The perpetrator of the Minnesota attack was a professing Christian. It seems to me that the Bible I read says, "Thou shalt not kill." It says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." I mean, to me, this is an individual who just simply gave way to evil. And I think there is no substitute in these moments for two things. Number one is swift and certain justice. I do believe, whether it's these type of incidents or mass shootings that take place in this country, our system of justice takes far too long, and that in Minnesota itself, there's actually not even a death penalty. And my hope is that as they follow the facts here, there may be a possibility of federal charges where a death penalty can be imposed. But I believe if to borrow an ancient phrase, if you take a man's life, by man will your life be taken. I support the death penalty as a means of justice, but putting someone behind bars, and you used to have a job that did that, 15, 20, 25 years before they face justice, just to me cries out for us to have an expedited due process, expedited habeas corpus, expedited reviews of these cases, but make it clear to anyone who might have the seeds of evil growing in their heart, or whatever their motivation, that they will meet justice swiftly and in the near future, their life will be taken from them. The other piece of that, I would tell you, it's something we worked on when I was governor of Indiana, Trey, and that is mental health in this country. I think we have an epidemic of mental illness in America. We walked away from institutional mental health care in about the 1980s in this country. It was one of my last acts when I was governor of Indiana is we broke ground on the first mental health institution in the state of Indiana that had been built in a quarter century. I mean, you know, because you talk to law enforcement all the time, that when they come across somebody who's deeply troubled, they can send them to the county lockup for a couple of days, and then they got to cut them loose. I mean, the school shootings that took place during our years in the White House, in Florida, Parkland, it broke my heart to learn about how many times that boy's family, his mother, had reached out to law enforcement and said, "You have to do something about him," and warned of the danger that he posed to the community. We have to have a place that families and law enforcement can take people who represent a danger to themselves or others. And I think the time has come for a deep conversation about restoring institutional mental health in this country.
You mentioned the time it takes to carry out the sentence. I prosecuted a number of people, and the jury gave them death. Prosecutors don't give out sentences, but the jury sentenced them to death. And Mr. Vice President, the one thing almost all of them have in common is they will outlive me. And people will not remember how they felt the day after the crime, the outrage, the grief. I mean, the victims will remember, but the public, I mean, you got to think back 25 years. That's about how long it takes to exhaust appeals. You also put your finger on something else. When I look at these headlines, and this killer in Minnesota calls himself a Christian, and I wish he'd call himself anything else in the world other than a follower of Christ, because Christ is the one who said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." He put the ear back on the Roman soldier after Peter cut it off. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." There is nothing homicidal about Jesus Christ. So how in the world someone can equate political violence with calling themselves a Christian is just dumbfounding to me. I mean, you're a man of faith. You know more Bible than I do, but how can you call yourself a Christian and act like that?
Yeah, it's unspeakable. It's and as I said, it just needs to be universally condemned, and we need to resist the temptation of having these long-winded cable television debates about public discourse in America when these tragedies happen. We need to make sure that justice is meted out, that it's swift, that it's certain, and that we're also creating the structures in the country that will intervene in these cases before tragedy strikes.
You know, Mr. Vice President, nobody likes it when an old man sits on the front porch and reminisces about the good old days, and I'm going to try not to do that. I mean, you and I had our share of verbal battles with the other side when we were in Congress. You were a very effective questioner. I had to go last, so I had to kind of take whatever was left at the point. But I remember maybe the most progressive Democrat you and I served with said he was going to boycott your inauguration and President Trump's inauguration. That was his public position. His private position was he came and gave me all of his inaugural tickets so people in my district could go.
Right.
Never had a cross word with him. So there was a public. To me, Congress has changed a little bit, even in the time since we've been gone. I get picking the two maddest people and putting them on I guess I say I get it. I try not to do it, but do you think Congress as an institution has changed even in the time since we were there in terms of the interpersonal relationships?
Well, I love your anecdote because I won't mention our friend by name out of respect. But the rest of that anecdote is that when I went to the congressional baseball game in my first year as vice president, he literally spotted me. And to your viewers and listeners, this was a lion of the liberal left in the Congress, and he had boycotted our inauguration. But we'd always had a strong personal relationship. And I've spoken about it and mentioned his name in the past. In fact, in my book, I write about this. But when he spotted me across the lobby at Victory Field, he made a beeline across the lobby, threw his arms around me, and said, "Congratulations! And just great to see you, and proud of you, and happy for you and Karen." And there were a lot of astonished congressional staffers standing around, but I wasn't, because look, you personified this. I hope I did. I know our friend Tim Scott and you wrote a very important book about this. But democracy depends on heavy doses of civility. I really do believe that there's been some erosion of that, particularly in the public discourse, and that we would do well as a country to think hard about that going forward and what our expectations are. One of the most resonant lines as I've traveled the country over the years has been, I think, the American people, and this is, look, a lot of people want to attribute this to my old running mate. Look, I was in Congress the better 16 years before President Trump and I went to the White House together. The coarsening of the debate long preceded President Trump or Twitter, and when I'm around the country, I tell people I think the American people long for us to restore a threshold of civility in public life, and virtually just as you did a moment ago, every head in the room nods, and I'm talking to people with hair the same color as ours. I'm talking to young people on college campuses around the country, and people get it. In fact, I would maintain that's the way the American people live out their lives most days. I live here in Indiana, and we got 5 acres and a pond and a riding mower and a pickup truck, and we go to the Kroger ourselves, we go to the gas station ourselves. So I'm out and about a lot here in the Hoosier State, and we're just Mike and Karen here in Indiana. So we're really not any big deal. And the truth is that you get 15 miles out of Washington, D.C., the people in this country actually get along pretty well most days. It's just, as I like to say, you got to have government as good as your people. You got to have government that says, okay, there's a line where I can hit you really hard, and I've seen you hit people really hard on the issues and on the facts. But you can draw the line at personal. I can say you're completely wrong without saying you're a bad person. And I think the American people will call our public life back to that, and I'll always be a champion of it. But to me, it reflects the character of the American people, and that principle that you do unto others as you have them do unto you. I think it's the way most Americans live, and I'm confident we'll get back to it.
Well, just to flash my bipartisanship, I think you did that on our side, and there was a guy named Peter Welch who was in the House from Vermont, now sentenced to a term of imprisonment in the U.S. Senate, that tried really hard to do that. Authentically progressive, but I never heard him launch an ad hominem attack, and I never saw him take a cheap shot or question someone's motives in a congressional or Senate hearing. He even met with Kash Patel, which was not a politically popular thing to do, but he was willing to do it. Let me let you
mentioned
go.
early on. You mentioned early on. I remember when that prominent Democrat back in the day said, he said, you got Mike Pence there. He's a decent guy. And your podcast listeners and viewers who go look it up, you'll find it real quick. He was excoriated by his party because I'm somebody that believes in the right to life. I believe in traditional marriage. and let's be really clear that there are equal opportunity offenders on the hard left and the hard right on this. That they give no quarter to the idea that you could have a completely different political philosophy and values than me and still be a good person. But I've tried to personify that, and I just know you do as well.
I've actually never heard anyone describe you as anything other than a decent person. So, I mean, people probably know who we're talking about. It doesn't get any higher up in that Democrat Party, but it's also not like effusive praise to say someone's.
Right.
I remember Dianne Feinstein hugged Lindsey Graham and they wanted to punish her. And my reaction was hugging Lindsey is punishment itself. You shouldn't do anything else to him beyond that. But
one of the things that really minted this for me, though, was, and I know that the foundation is all still there because I witnessed it. This was actually before you came to Congress, but not a lot before. But I was in Washington, D.C. on September 11th. I was on Capitol Hill. I huddled at the Capitol Hill police chief's basement with Republicans and Democrats all seated on the floor as we watched the Pentagon burn, as we watched the towers fall, as we heard about the heroes over the skies of Pennsylvania. And I tell people that, for months after that, and on that day, politics, personal invective politics vanished. I remember saying that I was actually in the Capitol Hill police chief's office totally by accident when the leadership of the House and Senate was huddled and getting real-time reports on what was happening in Pennsylvania. I write about it in my book, which if people are interested in, it came out a couple years ago. It's entitled "So Help Me God." But I remember in the setting, and I was a freshman in Congress, Trey. I had no business being in the room I was in, but I was kind of swept up in there because the Capitol Hill Police took me along with a Democrat member of leadership named David Bonnier. And I was just in the room and I had nowhere else to be, so I stayed. And in the beginning, there was this, Republicans were over in one corner, Democrats were over in another corner, and people were huddled and talking just to themselves. Then the phone rings, the Capitol Hill Police Chief picks up the phone, puts it back on its rocker, and says there's an aircraft inbound to the Capitol and it's 12 minutes out. And the room went dead silent. And every one of us, to a man and woman, looked out the window of the Capitol Hill Police Chief's office to see that Capitol dome. And I know we all thought at the same time if we were looking at that dome for the last time. And but in that moment, all of a sudden people started taking their jackets off, throwing them over chairs, getting out yellow pads. And there were no Democrats in that room. There were no Republicans in that room. There were just Americans. And all of a sudden, all the Republican and Democrat leadership huddled around a table and said, okay, what do we need to take off the calendar? What do we need to put on the calendar? Everything that divided was set aside. We've got to work on supporting our military. We've got to work on supporting industries that are being impacted. It was a deeply inspiring moment, and it survived for weeks and to some extent months after that, where Republicans and Democrats came together as Americans. And I have no doubt in my mind that push come to shove, that's all still there. Americans, we're people with strong hearts and strong opinions, and we like a good debate, but when it really matters, Americans come together and can set aside what divides and work together, and we always will.
I have to believe you're right. I think you had left. You were the vice president when Stevie came back on the House floor for the first time. And it didn't matter whether it had been was a Democrat. And I remember Cedric Richmond, who was no shrinking violet when it came to being a Democrat, stood over there with us on our side of the House because he and Scalise happened to be longtime personal friends. But those moments of unity seem to be fleeting, and they don't seem to last as long in the aftermath. And to your point, I think the American people do better than the people that they send to represent them. I don't argue with the person I'm sitting beside on the airplane. We don't immediately try to find what we disagree on. I usually tell them I'm a psychiatrist, so they don't want to talk to me anymore, or a lawyer. Either one of those works. So
Well,
I
I've
hope
lost
you're
count of
right.
the number of times over the last 4 years since we left public life. 'Cause I travel about half the time and always come home to Indiana, but it's amusing to me because sometimes we have escorts with people with uniforms, and they say, "Is this hard for you to travel?" And I say, "No." To be honest with you, I have been deeply humbled at the number of Americans who have come up from every political background, just to reach out a hand and say thanks for your service. I've had strong, when I was running for president, I've had strong Trump supporters walk up to me and say, "I'm for Trump, but got a lot of respect for you, and I appreciate you, and I thank you for your service to the country." I've had an awful lot of Democrats come up to me and say the same thing, and it's deeply humbling. The character and the decency and the graciousness and the generosity of the American people, I've seen firsthand in my personal life and in my career. And as I like to say, we just got to have government as good as our people again, and I know we will.
Well said. All right, before I let you go, you've given us a glimpse into current life for Mike and Karen Pence. I'm imagining you on a riding lawnmower and shopping at Kroger. Any idea what the future holds for Mike Pence, or is that just a matter of prayer and waiting on God to send you in a direction?
Well, the most important thing in my life is my faith. And so opportunities for me to share what Jesus Christ means to me and has meant. I accepted Christ in 1978 at a little college in Kentucky as a freshman at Hanover College, and the opportunity to share about my faith. I've been teaching at a Christian college in Western Pennsylvania, and trying to encourage young people that you don't need to make a choice between living out your faith and pursuing a life in politics. You can, as you prove to, you can do both. Now you have to make choices along the way, but you can do both. So I think for me, continuing to be a voice for my Christian faith, a voice for those conservative values we were talking about before in the life of the party, and I'm working on a new book a little bit about where I think the best pathway forward for prosperity and security for America and American families are, and ultimately beyond that, we'll just be on God's good time. Somebody said to me the other day, what's your 5-year plan? And I said, I literally have never been a long-term planner, but it's worked out pretty well so far. I just try and keep faith to what I believe, keep my marriage and my family first, and trust God for the balance, and that's how we're approaching every day.
When will your new book be out? And far be it from me to act as any kind of editor, but I do think you are uniquely well positioned to weigh in on the debate that's going on between doctrinaire conservatism and this populism. I don't know if this book does that, but one of these days, I'd love for you to write the contrast. There is overlap, but there's also some contrast.
Yeah. Well, I tell people I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. I really do believe these principles that have defined our party for more than 50 years. I mean, Abraham Lincoln described himself as, he said, "I am a conservative." And that the belief in free markets, the belief in the limited government defined in the Constitution, the belief in traditional values, and a strong defense, strong America in the world. This is a pathway forward, I think, not just for our party, but for our country. And you can bet I'm going to be writing about that. I'm going to continue to speak about that. And We'll keep faith to all the things that are important to us, just like you do, and we'll let the future take care of itself.
Yes, sir. Amen. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed serving with you. I enjoyed bumping into you. I tried not to be a frequent visitor to the White House. I was never a problem child. I never felt the need to have special attention. But it's been wonderful to catch back up with you. And thank you for the graciousness you showed to me while we were in Congress together. I could not have had better role models to follow in terms of how to comport myself. So thank you for that and for your service to our country. Special thank you to your family members that are in uniform serving our country.
Thank you, Trey. I'll pass that along. And thanks for having me on. This has been a real joy, and every continued success to you and Terry and your whole family.
Yes, sir. God bless you and Karen. We'll see you soon.